The runaway bride. The wind shrieked, an unholy tormentor tearing at the remnants of Rosie's wedding dress. Sleet hammered her, each impact a frigid sting. The mire tugged at her satin-clad feet, hindering her desperate flight. The pursuing shouts, the canine chorus, echoed in her mind. Her lungs burned, a searing protest against the frantic pace, but halting was unthinkable. Freedom, a shimmering illusion, beckoned, and she would fight her way toward it, even if it meant her demise. She blundered through the tumultuous dark, the distant manor's feeble glow consumed by the squall. Thorns raked her arms, leaving inflamed welts on her skin. A tree limb struck her temple, a sharp burst of agony, yet she pressed onward, driven by desperation and a dwindling ember of hope. She had to reach sanctuary. She had to vanish. Then, glimpsed through the sheeting rain, a hazy illumination, a promise in the tempest. A porch light. Refuge. Gathering her last reserves, she stumbled toward it, her legs heavy as stone. Dusty Rivers, contemplating the tempestuous night over a glass of whiskey, heard a dull thud. He initially dismissed it as the wind abusing the porch swing, but a soft whimper followed. Grasping his rifle, its weight of familiar comfort in his weathered grip, he warily opened the door. The sight before him compelled him to lower his weapon. A woman, barely more than a girl, lay sprawled on his porch, a waterlogged tangle of lace and hair. She was trembling violently, her face ashen and marred by a bruise. He knelt, his calloused hands surprisingly gentle as he felt for a pulse. Faint, but present. God Almighty, he muttered, gathering her into his arms. She was featherlight, delicate as a wren. He carried her inside, the cabin's warmth a stark reprieve from the storm's brutality. He settled her on the dilapidated couch, its springs emitting a mournful groan. Crouching once more, he studied her. The ravaged wedding dress, caked in mud, told a story. A runaway bride, and one who had clearly resisted. A bruise bloomed on her cheek, and a trickle of blood stemmed from a gash on her forehead. He seized a clean cloth and carefully dabbed at the wound, wincing as she flinched. Her eyes fluttered open, wide with fear. "Easy there, darlin'," he murmured, his voice a deep rumble. "You're safe now." Her gaze darted around the cabin, cataloging the rough-hewn logs, the sparse furnishings, the rifle leaning against the wall. She seemed to recoil into the cushions, her eyes fixed on him. "Who are you?" she breathed, her voice raspy. "Dusty," he answered, maintaining a steady, soothing cadence. "Dusty Rivers. What's your name?" She hesitated, suspicion clouding her features. "Rosie," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "Rosie Bellwether." "All right, Rosie Bellwether," Dusty said, rising. "Let's get you out of those soaked clothes. I'll find something dry." He rifled through a time-worn trunk, unearthing a faded flannel shirt and a pair of his old work pants. They would drown her, but they were all he had. He placed them on the couch. Fires blazing in the hearth, he indicated the crackling flames. "Get yourself warmed up. I'll put on some coffee." He withdrew to the kitchen, the scent of brewing coffee permeating the small space. He kept watch on Rosie, noting how she huddled near the fire, her eyes never leaving him. He understood her terror. He handed her a steaming mug, the warmth spreading through her chilled hands. She took a tentative sip, her eyes closing in momentary bliss. "Thank you," she breathed. "What were you running from, Rosie?" he inquired, his tone gentle yet unwavering. She recoiled, tears welling in her eyes. I can't," she stammered. "He'll find me." Dusty pressed, his hand instinctively drifting toward the rifle. "My husband," she choked out, the word a painful obstruction. "He's not a good man, Mr. Rivers. He would have killed me." Dusty's jaw clenched. He knew the breed of man who preyed on the vulnerable. "He won't find you here," he stated, his voice firm. "Not while I have breath in me." Rosie studied him, her gaze probing. She saw the fatigue etched into his face, the lines carved by years of adversity, but she also detected something else, a glimmer of compassion, a spark of possibility. I don't know how to repay you, she said, her voice trembling. Just rest, Dusty replied. We'll sort it out in the morning. Looking at the tempestuous night, he knew that dawn might bring more than just sunlight. It might herald trouble, and he knew, with a conviction that settled deep within him, that he would shield this runaway bride, whatever the cost. A dev kindness. The fire crackled, spitting a shower of sparks that danced in the hearth before vanishing. Rosie watched them, mesmerized, as if they held the answers to the questions swirling in her head. She'd been silent for a long while, wrapped in a thick blanket Dusty had offered, the warmth slowly seeping into her chilled bones. The throbbing in her ankle had subsided to a dull ache, but the fear remained, a knot lodged tight in her stomach. Dusty sat opposite her, his gaze steady, patient. He hadn't pressed her, hadn't demanded explanations, simply waited. Now, he stirred the fire with a poker, the metal ringing softly against the grate. "You gonna tell me what you're running from, Miss Bellwether?" he asked, his voice low, without judgment. Rosie flinched at the sound of her name. It felt foreign, tainted. She drew a shaky breath. "Jeb," she whispered, the name like a curse on her tongue. "I was supposed to marry him today." Dusty's expression didn't change. "Supposed to? He's not a good man," she choked out, the memories flooding back, sharp and brutal. The forced smiles, the veiled threats, the iron grip on her arm that tightened just a little too much. "My father, he owed Jeb money. A lot of money. Jeb said he'd forgive the debt if I married him." She looked down at her hands, twisting the worn fabric of the blanket. "I tried to refuse, but my father, he was desperate. He begged me, said it was the only way to save the farm." Her voice cracked. "So I agreed. I thought maybe I could live with it. But then I saw the way he looked at me, like I was property, and I knew I couldn't." She recounted the wedding, the suffocating dress, the clammy feel of Jeb's hand in hers. She told Dusty about the moment she saw her chance, the dash through the crowd, the desperate scramble onto the first horse she could find. She omitted the stolen money. Shame kept it locked inside. Dusty listened in silence, his eyes never leaving her face. The firelight danced in their depths, reflecting a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher. Sorrow? Anger? Understanding? When she finished, the cabin was filled with the heavy silence once more. Rosie held her breath, waiting for him to speak, to judge, to tell her to leave. He finally sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of the world. He stood and walked to the window, staring out into the storm. The wind howled, rattling the panes. "Reminds me of another storm," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Took everything I had." Rosie watched him, confused. She didn't know what he meant, but she sensed a pain in him that mirrored her own. He turned back to her, his face etched with a weariness that aged him beyond his years. "Jeb will come looking," he said, his voice grim. "He won't take kindly to being jilted." Rosie's heart leaped into her throat. "I know," she whispered. "That's why I can't stay. I'll just keep going." Dusty shook his head. "You won't get far in this weather. And even if you did, where would you go? Jeb has money, influence. He'll find you eventually." He paused, his gaze hardening. "Unless..." He walked over to the fireplace, picked up the poker again, and jabbed at a stubborn log. "Unless you disappear." Rosie stared at him, bewildered. "What do you mean?" He looked at her, his eyes piercing. "I mean you stay here, with me. I'll teach you how to survive in the wilderness. How to shoot, how to track, how to disappear. And when Jeb comes looking, he won't find Rosie Bellwether. He'll find someone else entirely." Hesitation warred with desperation in Rosie's eyes. Staying meant putting Dusty in danger, relying on a stranger she barely knew. But leaving meant certain capture, a life of misery with Jeb. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." Dusty's gaze softened, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "Maybe," he said quietly, "it's because someone once did something for me when I needed it most. And I figure it's time I paid that debt of kindness forward." He extended his hand, calloused and strong. "So what do you say, Miss Bellwether? You ready to disappear?" Rosie looked at his hand, then back at his face. In his eyes, she saw not pity, but determination. Not lust, but respect. And for the first time since she'd fled the wedding, she felt a flicker of hope. She reached out and took his hand, her grip firm. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger now. "I'm ready." Learning the land. The saddle was an alien landscape beneath her. Rosie's fingers, locked around the pommel, showed white against the aged leather. Penny, a mild-mannered sorrel, shifted, her coat radiating an aroma of sun-baked earth and hay. Dusty, a roadmap of wrinkles etched around his eyes, stood nearby. "Easy there," he murmured, his voice a deep vibration. "She senses your apprehension. They always do." Rosie drew breath, the mingled sense of animal and field filling her. Despite the effort, the phantom sensation of Jeb's brutal grip constricted her muscles. "He's not here," Dusty stated, as if privy to her thoughts. "Just you and Penny. Let her be your legs." He guided her hands on the reins, demonstrating feather-light guidance. Initially, the mare only plodded, each movement a painful echo in her still tender body. But gradually, as Rosie discovered equilibrium and her anxiety diminished, Penny responded in kind. They transitioned to a gentle jog, then a lope, the wind lashing through Rosie's unbound hair, a resurgence of untamed joy she'd thought lost. Later, Dusty directed her to a makeshift range rigged against a craggy rock face. A discarded tin can balance precariously on a weathered stump. The rifle, heavy and impersonal in her grasp, felt more implement of destruction than tool. "Remember the drill?" Dusty coached, his tone even and grounding. "Stance, breath control, aim. Don't snatch. A smooth pull." Rosie squinted along the barrel, the kind of diminutive target in the vastness. Closing her eyes, she inhaled deeply, exhaling with deliberate slowness. The memory of Jeb's menacing words surged, igniting a fierce blend of fury and resolve. She squeezed. The rifle recoiled against her, the report echoing fiercely in the tranquil valley. The can danced, then toppled with a metallic clang. A smile slowly unfurled on Dusty's face. Not bad for a greenhorn. The ensuing days settled into a rhythm of instruction and labor. Dusty showed her how to repair damaged fencing, distinguish safe flora from poisonous, and chart a course by the stars. Rosie, in exchange, assisted with the endless duties of ranch life, feeding the fowl, milking the goats, drawing water from the depths of the well. The work was demanding. Her body protested with aches in forgotten places. Yet, with each passing sunrise, she felt resilient, more capable. The dread that had clung to her since fleeing her father's farm started to unravel. One evening, as the sun bled across the sky in shades of fire and plum, Rosie sat on the porch, patching a hole in one of Dusty's shirts. The repetitive motion was almost a meditation. Dusty sat beside her, carving a piece of wood with his worn knife. "You pick things up quick," he remarked without raising his eyes. Rosie shrugged. "I had a decent teacher." Silence settled, a companionable quiet. The only sounds were the chorus of crickets and the distant bellow of livestock. "Why this, Dusty?" Rosie finally voiced the question she'd been suppressing for days. "Why are you helping me?" Dusty paused in his carving, his gaze drawn to the distant peaks. "I owed your pa a debt," he said softly, his tone laced with the past. "Pulled me out of a bad situation long ago. Never forgot it." Rosie waited for further explanation, but he remained silent, his expression obscured by the dimming light. She suspected a deeper narrative resided within him, one he wasn't yet sharing. But she wouldn't pry. "Not yet. Thank you," she murmured. "For everything." Dusty nodded, his attention still fixed on the horizon. He remained silent, but Rosie detected a fleeting expression in his eyes, a glimpse of vulnerability beneath his hardened exterior. A profound certainty settled within her. Here, at least for the moment, she was secure. Blossoming strength. The barrel of the rifle felt almost natural in Rosie's hands now, no longer the unwieldy weight that threatened to topple her over. Dusty had her shooting at tin cans perched on fence posts, each one a small victory against the fear that still lingered in her chest. Today he'd upped the ante, A crow, brazen and black, perched atop the highest post, cawing mockingly. "Now, Rosie," Dusty drawled, his voice low and steady behind her. "Remember what I showed you. Breathe. Squeeze. Don't jerk." Rosie inhaled, the dry scent of sage filling her lungs. She focused on the black bead of the crow's eye, silencing the tremor in her hands. This wasn't just about hitting the target. It was about control, about taking back the power that had been stolen from her. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and the crow exploded in a flurry of feathers, plummeting to the ground. Silence descended, broken only by the whisper of the wind. Rosie lowered the rifle, her heart hammering. She hadn't thought she could do it. A slow smile spread across her face, a genuine, untainted smile that reached her eyes. Dusty clapped her on the back, a rare display of physical affection. "Good shot, Rosie. Damn good." He rarely offered praise, making it all the more meaningful. Rosie felt a warmth spread through her, a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with proving herself to anyone else. It was for her. The days that followed were a blur of activity. She learned to mend fences, her fingers becoming calloused and strong. She helped Dusty with the horses, finding a quiet solace in their powerful presence. She even started to bake bread, the yeasty aroma filling the small cabin with a sense of home she hadn't felt in years. Dusty watched her, a silent observer. He saw the way she moved now, with a newfound confidence. The way her shoulders were straighter, her chin held higher. The haunted look in her eyes was slowly fading, replaced by a spark of resilience. He'd seen wounded animals heal before, but Rosie's transformation was different. It was like watching a flower bloom in the desert, defying the odds with its tenacity. One evening, after a long day of hard work, they sat down to a simple meal of beans and cornbread. The setting sun cast long shadows across the room, painting the rough-hewn walls in hues of orange and gold. Rosie ate slowly, savoring the simple flavors. The silence between them was comfortable now, no longer filled with the awkwardness of their first days together. Dusty cleared his throat. "You're getting good at this, Rosie," he said, gesturing with his fork towards the bread she'd baked. "Thank you," she replied, her voice soft. I'm starting to enjoy it." He nodded, his gaze unwavering. "It suits you. Being strong." Rosie met his eyes, a flicker of something unreadable passing between them. She looked away first, suddenly flustered. They finished their meal in silence, the only sound the crackling of the fire in the hearth. As Rosie began to clear the table, Dusty stopped her. "Leave it," he said. "Let's sit a spell." He gestured to the two rocking chairs by the fire. Rosie hesitated for a moment, then nodded and settled into one of the chairs. The gentle rocking motion was soothing, easing the ache in her muscles. Dusty sat beside her, his gaze fixed on the flames. After a few moments of silence, he spoke, his voice low and rough. "You remind me of your father, Rosie." Rosie's head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise. "You knew my father?" Dusty nodded slowly. "We were friends. A long time ago." He didn't elaborate, and Rosie didn't press him. She could sense the pain in his voice, the weight of unspoken memories. They sat in silence for a long time, the fire slowly dying down. Rosie found herself strangely comforted by his presence, by the quiet strength that radiated from him. She was still afraid, still haunted by her past, but for the first time in a long time, she felt safe. As the last embers faded, Dusty stood up. "Time for bed," he said, his voice gruff. Rosie nodded, her heart filled with a strange mix of gratitude and longing. As she walked toward her room, she glanced back at Dusty. He was still standing by the fire, his silhouette outlined against the darkness. He looked lonely, and for a fleeting moment, Rosie wanted to reach out to him, to offer him the same comfort he had given her. But she didn't. She turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving him alone with his memories. The quiet connection between them deepened, a fragile seed planted in the harsh soil of their shared isolation. Whispers in town. The bell above the door of Maddie's mercantile jingled, announcing a visitor. Maddie looked up from meticulously arranging spools of thread, a smile already forming on her lips. It was good for business to be friendly, and today, business was slow enough to make her downright chatty. "Well, hello there, stranger. What brings you to Havens Creek today?" Maddie asked, her voice warm and welcoming. The man who entered was tall and lanky, with a weathered face and a worn leather satchel slung across his shoulder. He wore a dusty brown suit that had seen better days, and a wide-brimmed hat shaded his eyes. "Just passing through, ma'am. Name's Earl, traveling salesman. Got a little bit of everything in this bag. Needles, thread, combs, ribbons, you name it." Maddie gestured towards the counter. "Well, Earl, you've come to the right place. Always looking for something new to stock. Have a look around. Make yourself at home." Earl chuckled, setting his satchel down with a thump. He spread out his wares on the counter, displaying an array of colorful trinkets and practical necessities. Maddie examined the items with a practiced eye, picking up a bolt of vibrant blue fabric. "Pretty color," she commented. "Might be just what Mrs. Henderson needs for her daughter's quilt." Earl beamed, sensing a sale. "Indeed, ma'am, finest quality. And speaking of pretty colors, I saw the most striking woman out on the road yesterday. Headed towards Dusty's place, if I'm not mistaken." Maddie's eyebrows rose in curiosity. "Dusty? Don't get many visitors out there. Who is she?" Earl shrugged. "Couldn't say for sure. But she was a looker, even with a bit of limp. Had this lost little girl look about her, you know, like a fawn in the woods." He paused, tapping a finger against his chin. "Seemed familiar somehow, like I'd seen her picture somewhere, maybe in the Gazette." Maddie frowned slightly. Dusty keeps to himself. Surprising he'd let anyone stay out there. She bought a few yards of the blue fabric and a comb with a mother-of-pearl handle. Cleet, who had been loitering near the back of the store, ostensibly examining a display of farm tools, stiffened. He'd been nursing a simmering resentment since Jeb had chewed him out for letting Rosie slip away. He'd heard every word. The description, the mention of Dusty's ranch. It all clicked into place with a sickening thud in his gut. He shifted his weight, pretending to still be interested in the tools, but his ears were straining to catch every nuance of the conversation. Earl packed up his remaining goods, tipping his hat to Maddie. "Pleasure doing business with you, ma'am. I'll be sure to stop by again next time I'm passing through." Maddie smiled. "Safe travels, Earl." As the bell jingled again, signaling Earl's departure, Cleet straightened up, his eyes narrowed. He ambled towards the counter, affecting a casual tone. "Who was that feller?" he asked, trying to sound nonchalant. Maddie glanced at him, her expression mildly irritated. Cleet was a frequent customer, but she never much cared for him. There was a shiftiness about him, a way he avoided eye contact that made her uneasy. "Just a traveling salesman, Cleet. Nothing for you to worry about." Cleet leaned closer, his voice dropping to a low murmur. "He say anything interesting?" Maddie sighed. "Just talk about his travels. Said he saw someone heading out towards Dusty's place. That's all." Cleet's eyes gleamed with a predatory intensity. "Dusty's place, huh? Who was it?" Maddie shrugged again. Said he didn't know. Just a woman. Seemed like she was hurt. That was all Cleet needed. He mumbled a quick goodbye and hurried out of the store, his mind racing. He knew Jeb wouldn't be pleased with him for letting Rosie escape. But this was his chance to redeem himself. He pictured Jeb's face, the rare smile of approval that would crack its stony surface when he delivered this news. It would be worth more than money. He practically ran to his horse, untethering it with fumbling fingers. Dusty's ranch wasn't close, but he knew the way. He'd been out there once, years ago, with Jeb. He remembered the isolation, the feeling of being swallowed by the vastness of the land. He spurred his horse into a gallop, the wind whipping through his hair. The setting sun cast long shadows across the plains as he rode, his thoughts consumed by Rosie and the retribution that awaited her. He had no idea what Jeb would do once he had her back, but he knew it wouldn't be pleasant. And for the first time, a flicker of unease sparked within him. Was this truly about duty, or was something darker? He pushed the thought away, focusing on the image of Jeb's approval, the promise of absolution for his failure. He would bring her back. He had to. Shadows lengthened. Dust devils whirled on Main Street. mirroring the knot of apprehension tightening in Rosie's gut. Jeb's men had arrived, their presence a subtle poison seeping into the very soil. No fanfare, no bold declarations, just insidious inquiries about newcomers. Specifically, a fair-haired woman, perhaps a little lost? Mr. Abernathy, the spindly postman, wrung his hands while recounting the questioning to Maddie, who relayed the news to Dusty, her expression like granite. They weren't outright threats, Maddie said, backlit by the harsh, angular sunset. But their eyes, they were glacial. She spat a brown stream. They're hunting for trouble or carting it with them. Dusty acknowledged her words with a nod, his gaze distant. Behind him, Rosie's hand, a feather-light reassurance, rested on his spine, a silent plea. The air thrummed with unspoken fears, their hard-won peace a fragile thing, threatening to shatter. Later, supper finished, the dishes cleared. The ranch house felt like a cage, the silence amplifying the house's ancient groans. They'll return, Dusty asserted, his voice a low growl, as he attacked the fire with unnecessary ferocity. They won't quit until they find you, or believe you're gone for good. Rosie hugged herself tightly, the old ache in her ribs a sharp reminder. What do we do? Dusty ceased his assault on the flames and turned, his features obscured by shadow. We prepare ourselves. He raked a hand through his already unruly hair. Running is no longer an option. We make them think twice about taking you. He unfurled a plan, a series of defenses woven together like a tight braid. Rosie listened, fear giving way to a steely resolve. They would fortify the ranch, boarding up windows and reinforcing doors. They'd rig tripwires and alarms, anything to gain precious time. Cleet will be with them. Rosie breathed, the name leaving a bitter taste. Dusty's jaw clenched. I assumed as much. He's Jeb's lapdog. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Don't dismiss him, Rosie. He's weak, and that makes him dangerous. The following day was a whirlwind of activity. The barn was reinforced, transformed into a potential sanctuary. Dusty instructed Rosie on the rifle's operation, her hands initially trembling, then finding purchase, growing confident. The rifle's sharp click shattered the quiet, a harsh herald of the impending storm. As twilight descended, painting the heavens in shades of violet and arterial red, Dusty and Rosie stood sentinel on the porch, surveying their preparations. The ranch, once a haven of peaceful solitude, now resembled a besieged fortress. A horse's whinny pierced the stillness. Dusty tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle propped against the railing. Rosie's breath caught. They listened intently. The sound recurred, closer this time, followed by the unmistakable thunder of hooves on the parched earth. They're here, Rosie whispered, her voice swallowed by the rising wind. Dusty offered no reply, his gaze fixed on the approaching figures, his face a stoic mask. Shadows crept forward, enveloping the ranch, as the night held its breath, expectant. Confessions under the stars. The air crackled, not with the imminent arrival of Jeb's men, though that hummed beneath the surface, a constant, low thrum of dread. No, this was different. This was the electricity of unspoken words, of feelings held captive for too long. Dusty sat on the porch swing, rifle across his lap, its cold steel a stark contrast to the warmth radiating from Rosie beside him. The moon, a silver coin in the inky sky, cast long, dancing shadows that shifted with the gentle breeze. He could smell the lavender from her hair, a delicate fragrance that cut through the dust and wood smoke. They'll be here soon, Rosie said, her voice barely a whisper. She stared out at the darkened fields, at the sentinels of cottonwood trees lining the horizon. Dusty nodded, his gaze fixed on the same distant point. Soon. He didn't elaborate. What more was there to say? They both knew what awaited them. A silence stretched between them, thick and heavy with unshed tears and unconfessed desires. Rosie shivered, though the night wasn't particularly cold. Rosie, Dusty began, his voice rough. He shifted, turning towards her, the swing creaking in protest. He wanted to take her hand, but the rifle felt like a barrier, a physical manifestation of the danger they were in. Dusty. She met his gaze, her eyes wide and luminous in the moonlight. He saw fear there, yes, but also something else. A flicker of hope, a reflection of his own longing. I haven't been honest with you. He hated the tremor in his voice. He, who could stare down a grizzly bear, was suddenly terrified of a woman's gaze. Rosie reached out, her fingers brushing against his calloused hand. He flinched, then closed his fingers around hers, holding on tight. The contact sent a jolt through him, a painful, exhilarating surge of energy. I know, she said softly. You haven't. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to meet her eyes. I didn't want this. Didn't want to feel this. He gestured vaguely, encompassing the ranch, the situation, the entire mess they were in. I wanted to protect you, keep you safe. And you have. He shook his head. Not enough. Not when he stumbled over the words, the confession caught in his throat. Rosie squeezed his hand. It's all right, Dusty. You can say it. He took a deep breath, the night air filling his lungs. I love you, Rosie. I think I have for a while now. The words hung in the air, shimmering like the moonlight on the dew-covered grass. He watched her face, searching for any sign of revulsion, of rejection. Instead, tears welled in her eyes. Oh, Dusty, she whispered. I love you too. A wave of relief washed over him, so profound it almost brought him to his knees. He tightened his grip on her hand, pulling her closer. I know the timing is bad, he said, a wry smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Terrible, she agreed, a watery smile mirroring his. But I had to tell you. I couldn't face what's coming without you knowing. She leaned in, her forehead resting against his. I feel the same way. They stayed like that for a long moment, lost in the quiet intimacy of their shared confession. The rumble of distant thunder broke the spell. They're coming, Rosie said, her voice laced with a newfound determination. Dusty straightened, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle. The fear was still there, but it was tempered now, strengthened by the knowledge that he wasn't alone. Then let them come, he said, his voice firm. We'll face them together. He looked at Rosie, at the woman he loved, and saw not fear, but a fierce resolve in her eyes. They were ready, preparing for the storm. The air hung thick and heavy, pregnant with the approaching storm, both literal and figurative. Dusty, his face etched with a grim determination that mirrored Rosie's own, pointed towards the ridge overlooking the main approach to the ranch. That's our first line of defense. Good visibility, natural cover. Rosie nodded, her hand instinctively reaching for the Winchester resting against her thigh. The initial shock of Jeb's imminent arrival had given way to a steely resolve, fueled by Dusty's unwavering presence and the blossoming love they had confessed. She wouldn't let Jeb take this away from her. Not this life, not Dusty. We need to make it less inviting, she said, her voice firm. Something to slow them down. Dusty's gaze swept the landscape, assessing the resources at their disposal. Find timber. We can create a barricade just beyond the tree line, force them to dismount. They spent the next hour hauling branches, logs, and rocks, building a crude but effective barrier. Sweat plastered Rosie's hair to her forehead, and her injured ribs throbbed, but she pushed through the pain, each heave and lift a testament to her newfound strength. Dusty worked beside her, his movements efficient and powerful, a silent reassurance in the growing tension. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, they moved closer to the ranch house. Dusty led her to the barn, its familiar scent of hay and horses now tinged with the acrid smell of gunpowder. He opened a hidden compartment beneath a stack of feed sacks, revealing a cache of weapons. Shotguns, rifles, and boxes of ammunition lay neatly arranged. I haven't used these in years, he said, his voice low, but they'll do the job. He handed Rosie a double-barreled shotgun, its weight comforting in her hands. He showed her how to load and unload it, his calloused fingers brushing against hers. Easy does it, he instructed, his eyes meeting hers. Don't rush. Aim true. Next. They moved to fortify the house. Dusty boarded up the windows on the north side, the side facing the most likely approach. Rosie helped him drag furniture in front of the doors, creating makeshift barricades. They filled buckets with water, gathered blankets, and stocked up on non-perishable food. As darkness enveloped the ranch, they sat on the porch, the silence broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote. The storm clouds gathered overhead, mirroring the turmoil within them. Rosie shivered, despite the warm blanket Dusty had wrapped around her shoulders. "Dusty," she said softly, what if we can't stop them?" He took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "We will. We have to." He paused, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "But if things go bad, you head for the mountains. There's an old prospector's cabin about 10 miles north. It's hidden, stocked with supplies. You'll be safe there." Rosie shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm not leaving you." Dusty cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "You have to promise me, Rosie. Promise me you'll survive. That's all that matters." She looked into his eyes, seeing the depth of his love and the raw fear that lurked beneath his stoic exterior. She knew he was right. She had to survive, not just for herself, but for him, for the possibility of a future they both desperately wanted. "I promise," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of their situation pressing down on them. Then, Dusty rose and retrieved a lantern from inside the house. He hung it on the porch, casting a warm glow on their faces. "Let's get some rest," he said, his voice laced with a quiet resolve. "We'll need our strength." Inside, they lay on the bed, fully clothed, the shotgun resting between them. Sleep was elusive, their minds racing with thoughts of what the morning would bring. But as Rosie drifted off, she found a strange sense of peace in Dusty's presence, a feeling that even in the face of overwhelming odds, they were not alone. They had each other, and that was enough to face whatever the storm might bring. The price of freedom. The sun hadn't even crested the eastern ridge when the dust cloud appeared on the horizon, a swirling brown serpent slithering closer. Dusty squinted, the coffee he'd just swallowed turning to acid in his gut. He recognized the lead vehicle, Jeb's monstrous, jacked-up truck, the one he'd seen tearing through Harmony Creek just last week. Rosie stood beside him on the porch, her hand gripping his arm tight enough to bruise. He could feel her trembling, a fragile bird caught in a sudden storm. "He's here," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the morning breeze. Dusty placed a reassuring hand over hers. "Stay behind me." They watched as the convoy, 3 trucks, each filled with men, roared onto the property, kicking up a choking cloud of red dirt. The vehicles screeched to a halt, forming a semicircle around the house. Jeb's truck was in the lead, naturally. Jeb Stone climbed out, his thick neck straining against the collar of his expensive but thoroughly dust-covered shirt. He swaggered forward, a sneer plastered across his face. Cleet Barlow, looking paler and thinner than Dusty remembered, shuffled out from behind him, avoiding eye contact with Rosie. Well, Jeb drawled, his voice carrying across the distance. "Look what we have here. Playing house, are we?" Dusty stood his ground, his expression a mask of calm. "You're trespassing, Stone. Get off my property." Jeb chuckled, a harsh, grating sound. "Your property? Last time I checked, this whole county belonged to folks with a little more ambition than you, Rivers. And as for trespassing, I'm just here to collect what's mine." He gestured towards Rosie with a sweep of his hand. "Rosie, darling, time to come home." Rosie flinched, but didn't move. Her eyes were locked on Jeb, a mixture of fear and defiance burning in their depths. "She doesn't belong to you, Jeb," Dusty said, his voice low and dangerous. "She's free to make her own choices." "Choices?" Jeb spat on the ground. "She made a choice, all right. She chose to run from her responsibilities. For me." He took another step forward. "Rosie, I ain't gonna ask you again. Come on now. Don't make this harder than it has to be." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Rosie said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'm done." Jeb's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little—" He took another step, then another, closing the distance between them. Dusty moved, placing himself squarely between Jeb and Rosie. I said, "She's not going with you. You want her, you'll have to go through me." For a moment, they stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. The air crackled with tension. Then, Jeb's sneer returned. "Fine," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "Have it your way." He nodded to his men. "Get him." The men surged forward, a wave of bodies intent on overwhelming Dusty. He didn't hesitate. He drew his Colt Peacemaker with practiced ease, the metallic click echoing in the sudden silence. The first shot rang out, shattering the morning calm. It wasn't Dusty who fired. Cleet Barlow, his face a mask of desperation, had pulled his own weapon. The bullet whizzed past Dusty's ear, kicking up dust behind him. "Cleet, you idiot!" Jeb roared, but it was too late. Dusty reacted instantly. He fired, the bullet finding its mark. Cleet crumpled to the ground, clutching his chest. All hell broke loose. Guns blazed, the air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the screams of men. Dusty moved with a speed and precision Rosie hadn't known he possessed, dodging bullets, returning fire with deadly accuracy. He took cover behind a support beam of the porch, using it as a shield while picking off Jeb's men one by one. Rosie, remembering Dusty's instructions, scrambled inside the house, grabbing the rifle he'd left leaning against the wall. She peered through the window, her heart pounding in her chest, searching for an opportunity to help. The battle raged on, a chaotic dance of death and desperation. The ranch, once a sanctuary, had become a war zone, and Rosie knew, with chilling certainty, that the price of freedom was being paid in blood. A new dawn. The reek of burnt powder soured the air, clashing with the iron scent of spilled blood. Rosie, wincing as her arm throbbed from the bullet's kiss, stood firm. Jeb Stone, his features twisted in a mask of fury and disbelief, gaped at Cleet Barlow's corpse sprawled near the porch steps. His remaining men, rattled by the sudden carnage, shuffled, their swagger noticeably deflated. "Rosie," Jeb snarled finally, his voice a guttural claim. "Pack your things. You're coming home." Rosie remained unmoved. The terror that had shadowed her for so long had been cauterized by the baptism of fire. Erect, she drew strength from Dusty's solid presence beside her, his expression a granite study in resolve. "This is my home, Jeb," she stated, her voice ringing with newfound clarity. "I'm staying put." Jeb's gaze narrowed to slits. "You're mine, Rosie. Always will be." "I belong to no one but myself now," she countered, the words sculpted from steel. Dusty shifted, interposing himself between Rosie and Jeb. His movements, economical and fluid, hinted at the lethality he had just displayed. "She's made her decision, Jeb. Best be on your way." Jeb's hand twitched towards his sidearm. "This ain't finished, old-timer." Dusty's riposte was lightning. In a blink, his own Colt Peacemaker materialized, its blued steel reflecting the wan morning light. The sheer velocity and deadly grace unsettled even Jeb's seasoned crew. "It is for you." Dusty's voice was a low growl, devoid of warmth. "Drop the iron, Jeb. Now." An eternity stretched between them, a taut silence vibrating with suppressed violence. Jeb's face was a battlefield of conflicting impulses, wrath, humiliation, and a reluctant recognition of his opponent's capabilities. At last, with a frustrated roar, he returned his weapon to its holster. "You'll rue this, Rosie," he spat, his eyes burning holes in her. "Both of you." He jerked his head at his men. "Let's ride." They scrambled onto their horses and thundered away, a maelstrom of dust and unspoken menace. Rosie watched them vanish, her pulse hammering against her ribs. The immediate peril had subsided, but she knew the storm was merely gathering force. Dusty lowered his pistol, his gaze tracking the retreating figures until they dissolved into the horizon. Only then did he turn to Rosie, his features softening with concern. He gingerly touched her injured arm. "Let's get you inside," he murmured. The ensuing hours passed in a flurry of activity. Dusty ministered to Rosie's wound, his hands sure and gentle as he cleansed and dressed it. He then turned his attention to fortifying the ranch, reinforcing the defenses and scrutinizing the perimeter. The air thrummed with the unspoken certainty of Jeb Stone's inevitable return. As the sun arced higher, a distant siren's cry sliced through the quiet. Sheriff Brody and a handful of deputies arrived, their faces etched with severity as they took in the carnage. Cleet Barlow's corpse and the pockmarked walls spoke volumes of violence and desperation. Dusty recounted the events with quiet authority, detailing Jeb Stone's arrival and Cleet's fatal misjudgment. Sheriff Brody listened intently, his expression unreadable as stone. He knew Dusty Rivers, a recluse, a man of few words. He also knew Jeb Stone, a man accustomed to getting his own way. After a meticulous investigation, the sheriff corroborated Dusty's account. He offered perfunctory condolences for Cleet's demise, his tone betraying a distinct lack of grief, and pledged to issue a warrant for Jeb Stone's apprehension. But Rosie knew that legal documents held little sway over a man like Jeb. As the sun dipped towards the horizon, casting long, skeletal shadows across the ranch, Dusty and Rosie stood together on the porch, watching the lawman depart. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, a suffocating premonition of what was to come. "He'll be back, won't he?" Rosie asked, her voice barely audible. Dusty enfolded her in his arms, pulling her close. "Yes," he affirmed, his voice a low rumble of reassurance. "But we'll be ready." He swept his gaze across the vast, untamed landscape, his eyes reflecting a quiet, unwavering resolve. He had embraced a life of solitude, finding contentment in his own company. But Rosie had shattered that stillness, bringing light and warmth into his existence. He would defend her, protect their nascent love with every ounce of his being. Rosie nestled into him, drawing strength from his unwavering presence. She was no longer the terrified, helpless woman who had sought refuge on his doorstep. She had confronted her inner demons, stared into the abyss, and emerged stronger, more resilient than she had ever imagined. She understood the trials ahead would be arduous, fraught with peril and uncertainty. But she also knew she was no longer alone. She had Dusty, and she had herself. As the final tendrils of sunlight bled across the sky in a symphony of crimson and gold, Dusty turned to Rosie and gently brushed a stray wisp of hair from her cheek. "We'll face it together," he promised, his eyes brimming with affection and unwavering determination. Rosie smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that illuminated her features. "Together," she echoed softly and reached up to kiss him. It was a kiss of hope, of resilience, of a love forged in the crucible of fear and violence. It was a silent pact, a pledge to confront whatever the future held hand in hand. The night descended, cloaking the land in darkness, but for Rosie and Dusty, a fragile dawn was beginning to break.